Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got Harem with Samui, Mabui and Karin Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Kanahagakure. Hokage's office. Ha. With an exasperated sigh, a blonde man could be seen seated behind a desk riddled with papers and scrolls. This man was none other the fourth Hokage and the infamous, Yellow Flash, Minato Namikaze. He was now struggling with an opponent that seemed to bring nothing but endless torture of boredom, and it was a fight that was passed down from his predecessors before him, paperwork. Hearing a knock at the door, Minato turns his attention away from the hell that was paperwork in favor of another job, a distraction, anything but the endless abyss and torture that was paper. Come in. He stated simply while staring at the remaining stack nightmares that needed to be processed. He could only thank the gods that there was no such thing as a paper jutsu. They would become the public enemies of any Kage or high official if their existence were to be known. He may have a heart attack just from seeing a jutsu like that in action. A Megakure tower. Achoo. A light and subdued sneeze could be heard within the dreary tower of the Rain Village. The source of which the sneeze came from was a blue-haired figure garbed in a black cloak with red clouds. She was above average in height for a woman with piercing amber eyes, lined with lavender eyeshadow. Below her lip was a piercing, and adorning her hair into a bun was a large, light blue paper flower. Her nails were dressed with orange polish and she wore a ring with the kanji character for white on her right middle finger. She brushed her nose lightly in response to her sneeze and thought to herself, strange, I do not feel sick nor have I been sick for a while from what I can recall, how curious. Quickly getting over her curiosity from the unexpected bodily action, she proceeded down the hall to report her most recent mission to the leader of her village. He was impatient, and things became difficult when he was irritated, especially when it concerned their search. She could only hope he won't be too disappointed with the results. A shiver suddenly went down the blonde Hokage's spine for a moment before he regained his posture. That was strange, he thought. It was almost as if I just jinxed myself. Before Minato could continue his pondering, his attention changed gears the moment a cough was heard. In front of him were two red heads that he was all too familiar with and happy to see. The first figure was the red hot-blooded habanero of the leaf and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. She wore a simple green loose-fitted dress over a white high-collared blouse. Her attire, though, did nothing to hide her slender figure and beauty. She had long red hair that came down past her waist, with two shoulder-length strands that framed the sides of her face and over her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and her violet eyes had a mesmerizing shine to them. Unless you were a victim to her fury in the past, you would see her as nothing more than a model of a woman. Beside her was the daughter of the two, and true Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Mito Uzumaki Namikaze. She was a carbon copy of Kushina in appearance for those that had seen her in her youth. Her temper was equally similar, though a bit more subdued due to the more collected nature of Minato. The only difference from her mother that could be noticed is that her hair seemed a bit more untamed like her father's, and her eyes radiated a light of cerulean that was easily more catching to the hearts and eyes of others in comparison to her parents. Her face was round, as was fitting for a young girl her age. This was something Kushina, however, knew would become a problem. It would definitely become the cause for a certain nickname Kushina had once been tortured by, Tomato. Despite this, she was certain to grow into a beauty of renown throughout the village, a thought that seemed to trouble her father every time he became aware of it. She's not ready to show interest in boys yet, he pronounced inwardly. It was more of a declaration than an opinion, but he could care less though. He felt that he had the right as her father. In his mind at least. Daddy. The young, second coming of the tomato, had all but hollered before making a blind rush to her father, glomping his chest in the process. Minato, who had already moved away from his desk to greet his family, returned her tackle with a hug of his own before picking her up and holding her in his arms. He returned her excitement with a smile of genuine happiness and love. How are you, little Red? What brings you here? She snuggled into his arms with a smile of her own before responding. We missed you, Daddy. And Mama said she wanted to ask you something too, so she said we could visit. She turned her eyes to meet with her father's, before they widened with an innocent light in them, and asked him, We can be here, right, Daddy? Oh no, thought her father with a cold sweat he felt like never before. He hadn't been this nervous since the Third Shinobi World War. She has learned, the eyes. It is probably important to take this time to explain the technique that Minato Namikaze has shown such fear towards. It is a technique that has existed through eons of time and has yet to lose in effect and efficiency. It was said to be the most overbearing of techniques in terms of persuasion, and has gone by many names throughout the ages. They have been called baby face, or crocodile tears. It has more commonly been referred to as the puppy eyes, but has recently garnered a new nickname most fitting for its recent evolution in potency. It has now coined the term, the pout of power. It is a look that demands leniency and strikes someone deep into their heart, forcefully wringing out feelings of guilt and submission. It is difficult to counter simply because it compels individuals with raw innocence and cuteness, to the extent that it becomes endearing and plays the strings of one's heart like a harp, lulling them into the desired actions of the caster. It was a skill of puppetry and manipulation that would put Sasori of the Red Sand to shame. With no malice present, an individual will naturally not have their guard up to prepare themselves for such a technique. The reason why it has evolved in naming from the puppy eyes to the pout of power is because it now involves physical action and expression. This is typically done with a quivering lip or softly grabbing onto the victim with a begging clutch. The effectiveness has been known to increase tenfold when physical interaction is involved, so it was determined by professionals to best resolve anything before it had ever reached that stage. The dangerous part was that even with repeated use, the quality of its effect never dwindles. That is the horror Minato had feared and still does to this day, as every sucker for adorableness should be. It was their greatest weakness. That, my friends, is the power of the eyes. Returning our focus back to Minato, when he noticed his daughter's lip begin to quiver, he knew he had to respond, and fast. Of course, sweetheart. There is not a time of day you can't visit me. My doors will always be open for you. He responded quicker than a flash of the Hiraishin. At this, Mito gave her father a knowing look and smiled mischievously, seemingly aware of her actions, not that her father noticed. He was too focused on convincing his daughter that he cared for and missed her equally as much. She would have to thank mommy later for teaching her. With a smile of her own, she gave her father a kiss on the cheek. Thanks, Daddy. I love you. Kushina, who had been watching the entire exchange, could only giggle mysteriously, knowing that she was the one responsible for giving her daughter the weapon that was the bane of every man's existence. As the conversation between the two began to die down, so too did the smile on Kushina's face. The reason for that was also the reason why she was here and wanted to speak with Minato. She initially didn't plan to bring Mito since the conversation would be pretty serious. Unfortunately, Makoto was too busy to watch over Mito for her, and anyone else she knew was either busy or away on a mission. She could only hope that Mito would not ask too many complicated questions. Minato seemed to notice the slight shift in the atmosphere around Kushina, and sent her a worried glance of his own. Kushi, is there something bothering you? Kushina turned her gaze downward for a moment, pondering on what she should say exactly. Finding the words she wanted to ask, she voiced them in an audibly soft tone only one within close proximity could hear. Do you know if there was any news about him yet? Minato frowned at the question, showcasing his own distress since he knew what she was talking about. He could only shake his head to her. Catching her look of sadness and disappointment, he tried to soothe her worries. I'm sorry, I have Anbu out there looking for him right now with Kakashi leading them. He was determined to find him too, so I know it will only be a matter of time. Kushina This seemed to erase some of her worries, but a look of shame combined with sadness was still existent on her face. I just feel so guilty, Minato. She stated her concerns bluntly, hoping to relieve some of the stress she had been withholding for a while now. We are from the same clan, yet I abandoned him. This is not how our people were, Minato. We looked after and loved one another. This betrayal eats at me every day. With that final burst of emotion, she began to tear up. Minato had known how much torture it had been for her. She would be sleepless during the night at times, and the bags under her eyes showed how tired she truly was. Kushina was a kind person at heart and never wanted things to turn out the way they did. In a moment of weakness, Danzo had been able to coerce them into choosing their daughter over him. Sacrificing another child for their own, while it was understandable to some extent, had left a bad taste in their mouth. When they finally caught wind of the reports concerning his past incidents, they were furious to say the least. Minato, how did we not see the way he was mistreated? We knew he would suffer from neglect, but the reports said he was abused and beaten, sometimes into a bloody pulp. How could this happen? While she still had an expression of sadness and her tone was low, it was obvious she was both curious and suspicious. I understand what you're saying, Kushi. It seems some information was withdrawn from us purposely, and I have a feeling Danzo may be involved. Unfortunately, my investigation team was unable to draw anything from the case. There is also the chance that the reporters may be biased against the fox. A low sigh escaped his lips, as if to express his helplessness with the situation. There is too much going on at once, Kushina, and I'm afraid discovering anything may be a lost cause. I'm certain he is alive out there. Kushina just bit her lips at the knowledge that her fellow clan member wouldn't receive the proper justice he deserved. Though, she was at fault in the first place for falling to Danzo's poisonous words. I really hope so, Minato. Naruto doesn't deserve the treatment he has received so far. I want to at least apologize, for whatever it's worth, and do something to make it up to him. Hearing the name, Naruto, Mito, who had dozed off sometime in the beginning of the conversation, rubbed her eyes awake and seemed to jerk straight up. Nah. Wuto, she questioned while mispronouncing the name slightly. Are we going to Haven Ramen again, mommy? I really love fish cakes. Dissipating the solemn mood with her cheeriness, Minato and Kushina began to chuckle, with the latter wiping her eyes of any tears that had formed in the previous conversation. They quickly formed smiles on their faces to avoid worrying their child. I wish I could marry fish cakes. Do you think I can, mommy? Mito continued with an excited voice. At that moment, Minato seemed to freeze as his fatherly instincts seemed to kick into overdrive. No, she is talking about food, not a certain male redhead, you know, Minato. Get a hold of yourself. In a bid to stray away from the idea of marriage, Minato continued this internal conflict he was having with himself, while Kushina began to laugh a little louder at the look of horror that seemed to appear on her husband's face. If there were few things that could scare a man, one of them would be another man taking away the heart of their little girl. Oh, I'm sure you can mini me too. Kushina said with a knowing look at her husband that only seemed to amplify Minato's growing internal struggle. Mito seemed to pout at the nickname. She knew she looked like miniature version of her mom, but she didn't have to remark her height as well, it was a touchy subject for her. Kushina continued after turning her focus back onto her daughter. Sorry honey, but we weren't talking about ramen. We were talking about a boy whose name is Naruto. He's currently away from the village right now. She stopped for a moment with a sad look, before quickly correcting herself so her daughter couldn't detect it. But I'm sure he will be back. He's an Uzumaki with red hair just like you and I, and we were always known to be stubborn. She finished with a smile. Mito seemed to contemplate her words, adopting a thoughtful and concentrated look, well, as concentrated as anyone her age could be. Apparently remembering something, she clapped her hands together as if finally remembering what it was. Oh, you mean Big Brother Whiskers. At that moment, time seemed to stop for the two older shinobi in the room. Kushina was the first to break the silence and ask curiously, Mito. Do you happen to know who I am talking about? Mito nodded her head exaggeratedly in response. Of course. When mommy and daddy are not home, I go visit old man Tuki and big sis Ayame. I see him sometimes, but we never talked. Kushina nodded at her daughter's response, before the little red head continued her tale. I like it when he's there. He always buys me ramen before he leaves. She exclaimed happily before adorning a slightly confused expression. But big sis Ayame always acts strange around him. Her face turns red a lot. She then drew closer to her mother, as if she was telling some sort of big secret. She whispered once her mother was in close proximity, I think big sis Ayame is allergic to Naruto, but doesn't want to tell him to make him feel bad. Kushina could only giggle at her daughter's silliness and innocence. Oh, how it was to be young and have your first crush. Little Mito, she's not allergic to him. It just means she likes him. Confused for only a moment, Mito seemed to understand after a moment of thinking. I agree. I like him too. At this, Minato felt like he would begin to cough out blood in response to such blasphemy. There is no way my little girl has her first crush already, it's too soon. I'm not ready to be a grandfather. Minato began to lose himself in his thoughts, seemingly forgetting that Mito still wasn't of marrying age. That's right. She must be thinking we're still talking about food. That has to be it. In order to relieve his worries, he glanced to Mito to see the look on her face, and almost immediately regretted it. A slightly red hue that was apparent to both Kushina and Minato appeared on the young Uzumaki's cheeks. She fidgeted slightly and seemed a tad bit flustered. It was the next words though that seemed to empty Minato of his soul. Plus, Mito seemed to stop for a moment before placing a hand to her heated cheeks. He looks kinda cool, she finished with a slight glimmer of admiration in her eyes, not realizing the damage she was doing to her father. Kushina openly, and loudly, laughed at this. It was loud enough that Minato was sure that his secretary in the floors below was able to hear her. With dull eyes, Minato was left with only one thing in mind. I'm sorry Naruto, but I kind of hope you don't come back. I pray for your safety and continued separation from my daughter. Uzushiogakur Hidden Chamber. There was a stern peace inside the recently unlocked chamber. It was an eerie calm that was enough to put anyone on edge. There was a light chill within the room as silence reigned in. At least, silence did reign the interior of the chamber. That is, until a figure with a familiar mop of red hair began to awaken from their temporary comatose state of slumber. A shiver ran through his body, feeling the cold chill of the room pass through his senses. It was a slow process, but he began to raise his body from the floor, leaning against the now open doors for support until he became more aware of his situation. God, my aching, everything. He spoke to himself, feeling the repercussions from his most recent endeavor. He could feel pain within every cell of his body, but noted that it seemed quite subdued in comparison to what he had felt before. It was a while before he was able to form any sort of productive action. He was still against the door for a while, attempting to rush the healing of his body through distributing his chakra into his muscles, organs, and tenketsu points. It was a slow process, but he knew he would be incapacitated until he was able to take care of his body. What slowed the process even further was the fact that he lacked any nourishment for a few days now, and though he had trained to starve himself for extended periods of time, it was an unhealthy course of action and could negatively affect his growth. He was still extremely lacking in chakra as well due to most of it being drained, and he knew the recovery of it all would take some time. It was shocking to him considering how he had never felt so drained, due in part to his unique bloodline, but he supposed nothing was truly impossible in the world. His adventure through the tunnels and bout with a tortuous door seemed to only prove these thoughts. It was a very long while, perhaps half a day before he felt he was capable of moving without pain, so he decided to take a closer look in his surroundings. The chamber itself didn't seem too different from where he started, but the difference lied in what was in the room. As he had recalled before passing out, there was an ancient-looking pedestal before him with scrolls of differing colors that seemed to levitate from its position. He proceeded to approach the curious-looking items, grabbing them from their position and examined them more closely. To his left was a black scroll the same size and thickness of his forearm, and it seemed to have a blood seal array surrounding the white symbol of his clan that was also imprinted onto the scroll. Turning his head to the right, he saw a scroll similar in size but opposing in color. It was white along with a black imprint of the mysterious clan symbol he had seen before. Surrounding the symbol was a sealing array slightly more complex than the other. There were 2 rings of seals that seemed to surround the clan crest. His curiosity and excitement began to eat at him as he pondered the mystery of the scrolls, and before he decided to take any sort of action, he was interrupted by a harsh growl from his stomach. Naruto turned his curious gaze into a sharp, cold glare towards his stomach, seemingly because he felt betrayed by his natural bodily function. "You traitor," he thought to himself. As much as he wanted to take in his hard-earned prize, he was aware of his current situation. He was starving in an empty chamber with no exits in sight. If he did not escape soon, he would die here. He cursed the human body and their needs for survival before pondering his situation. If I want to live long enough to read what is inside the scrolls, I'm going to have to find a way out of here. But how? And before he could finish his thought, a sealing matrix appeared suddenly on the pedestal that previously hosted the 2 scrolls, before flashing a familiar blinding light. This happened for a moment before the room adopted its previous state of darkness and solitude. In a flash of light, Naruto found himself in the ruins of the library had he been inside of before his journey into the tunnels and chambers. The sun was high in the sky showing signs of falling, signifying more than half of the day was over. His face was currently blank as he was starting to question his sanity. I swear there is a conscience in that labyrinth. There are just way too many coincidences going on in there. He would have continued his analysis of the chamber if it weren't for a familiar sound of growling that came from his stomach. Focusing his eyes onto the 2 scrolls that were in his hands currently, he sighed in exasperation before tucking them away into a storage seal he had on his arm. Stretching his still sore muscles and bones, he began to move away from the ruins in an effort to fulfill his needs to survive. All right, let's find some food before settling down and doing anything else. It was later in the day now and approaching the evening if the sun gaining an orange and purplish hue was any sort of evidence to go by. Naruto could be found seated around a small fire he started not long ago with several fish being cooked on sticks. There were not many resources to work with on a ruined island such as this, but if there was one good thing about being surrounded by a large body of water, it was the excess amount of fish. He had also found a source of fresh water on the island, which he supposed should have been obvious. There was no way there could have been an island full of people without some form of freshwater, and importing such a basic need seemed pretty stupid if he might say so himself. He was just finishing his 23rd serving of cooked fish before sitting down with a content look on his face. He was not sure how long he was incapacitated for, considering he had washed up onto the coastline of the village for a time and his most recent knockout from the door of hell. Judging by the amount he ate, he had assumed it might have been quite a while, days even. It was hard to tell the passing of time without any source for doing so other than the sun. He then proceeded to unseal one of the scrolls he had locked away, summoning the first one that had caught his attention. He held the black Uzumaki scroll in his hands before taking a long, deep breath. He couldn't deny that he was excited to see what was inside. It was something he had desired for a long time. He would be the first one ever since the time of his clan's destruction to perhaps even see the scroll, let alone read it or be aware of its existence. He bit into his thumb, forming a few drops of blood before he swiped it over his crest mark, and the scroll began to glow a low, dark light before disappearing all at once. He had to say, it was a bit anticlimactic. He assumed some legendary being would be released or some great weapon would form, but he supposed that was his rare childish side taking over. He peeled back the edge of the scroll, opening it a bit, and came upon a thought-provoking sentence that seemed to be the name of the scroll. He read aloud, "Scroll of Origin, Foundation of Yin." It was a curious title, but he did not seem to form any deeper thoughts before opening the scroll further to read whatever else was inside. He was sure he would come to understand it more if he read through the content first. He was unsurprised by the content, if not a little disappointed to say the least. For the first half of the scroll, it had various sealing designs and names and may or may not have heard of before. They started off from the simple storage and blood seals, to various styles of barriers and arts that each served a different and unique purpose. He did note that there were differences in design that actually heavily improved their effectiveness. The storage seal could store more and the blood seals would only release if it came directly from the person. This avoided robberies from people who managed to get a drop of their blood. It was amazing, but he almost wanted there to be something more fantastic, fantasy-like even. He supposed though this was the reality of the world though, that was, until he came upon a technique that seemed horrifyingly familiar as he read every word. Sensory void prison, a product of many years of study, research, and experimentation into the human anatomy has resulted in what many deem the most inhumane and disturbing of techniques. Naruto gulped audibly when he read the short description of the technique before continuing with the passage. A large canvas is required in order to draw the necessary characters and patterns for the seals, and mastery in micro-sealing is imperative. Naruto paused once more, pondering the term that had yet to come up before. Micro-sealing. I've never heard of such a thing. Was that what I couldn't see before when I was trying to study it? He pondered this for another moment, before deciding to continue his reading. When a subject enters the presence of the seal, immediate effect is taken place. As the name implies, the subject enters a state where he loses all of his senses, except the ability to think. This begins to torture the subject, slowly degrading their sanity. Past examples were known to perform incredibly demeaning, degrading, and harmful acts upon themselves, in an effort to regain feeling. All subjects died in the end, and were not blessed to even feel pain when they were released from their misery. Naruto could now be seen shivering at the thought. A technique such as this was diabolical, perhaps even evil, but he couldn't help this natural interest he had in its creation. A thought seemed to appear in his mind and he shockingly found that he didn't mind thinking this way. I want this, I want to learn it. The power of this technique was terrifying to say the least and could be used as a useful deterrent in some cases. He decided to continue reading the passage to the end for any more information he could use. This technique was developed for the sake of imprisoning the worst of criminals when death was determined as too light of a punishment. It also served as a tool of interrogation, breaking the mind of any subject who had entered. Naruto could understand its uses, but it was the next line that shocked him the most. This technique has yet to be completed. This technique was not complete. If his mind wasn't blown already from what he had read earlier, it had surely exploded now. He truly had this strong desire to make this technique his in every way, evolve it, and refine it to be used as the perfect weapon. Breaking himself out of his drunken stupor of excitement, and continued down the scroll. He gave a passing glance at the names of different techniques that were all powerful in their own right. The section soon changed from sealing techniques to different methods of sealing. It wasn't a large list, but he did recognize that micro-sealing had been mentioned. Essentially, it revolved around the principle of writing out a sealing array and compressing it onto a single line or character. It was an incredibly flexible and powerful art. He was certain that if Danzo had ever caught wind of such a method, the seals that existed on all tongues of the root members would certainly be more potent and serve their original design much more effectively. It was a scary thought, but as long as Naruto didn't spread the information himself, he was safe. There were also other methods that caught his eye, like three-dimensional sealing, or animate sealing, but he decided to give them a better read later on. Though it was a great feeling having learned that there were so many styles of sealing, as well as powerful techniques, he didn't think anything was so shocking that it deserved to be preserved so strongly, that was, until he came upon a final discovery. Near the end of the scroll, there was a passage that detailed his clan a bit more. It was the first mention of his clan throughout the entire scroll, so his attention was caught immediately. The content itself, though, brought a dumbfounded expression onto his face. The passage read, "To the successor of the scroll. The history of the Uzumaki dates back to a time that followed the sealing of the living deity and progenitor of chakra, Kagaya Ostatsuki. The Uzumaki clan are living descendants of her sons, Hamura and Hagoromo Otsutsuki, though because we were not more skilled in the more appealing arts like jutsu or genjutsu, we were kept in the shadows. For ages this continued while the sons of Hagoromo battled each other through conflicting opinions on peace. This stretched even beyond their time as the reincarnations of Indra and Asura continued this tradition, even possibly until your present time. For years our clan lived in the shadows until I came upon 3 great revelations that pushed our clan forward into heights that were capable of overthrowing even the prowess of the 2 reincarnates. A prowess and skill that was once able to seal even the primordial entity that was the 10-tailed beast. Our first revelation came in the form of Fuinjutsu, or better known as the sealing arts. We have long since studied this mysterious art and discovered that it was very flexible and versatile of what it could do. Things that were otherwise impossible with ninjutsu was given form through the sealing arts. Our clan, for an unknown reason at the time, was capable of deciphering the language and pattern of seals and their characters. This mystery became unknown to us until another discovery was made. It came in the form and technique we now claim as a bloodline limit, adamantine sealing chains. Unknown to the general populace, there was more to this technique than meets the eye. It was with this knowledge and further research that I came upon the second revelation, and it was one I kept a secret from my brethren even until my death. The Uzumaki did not specialize in the sealing arts. The moment Naruto read this, he froze. What did this mean? How could their clan not specialize in the art? It was a form they were known to use through the ages for combat, and was the reason why they had become feared. It was the reason they met an unfortunate fate that led to their total destruction. He was dying to know the answer, and the next words did not disappoint. We fooled ourselves into thinking we specialized in the art because we were capable of understanding it easier than others. I had always felt that this case was always lacking a reason, and once the development of the adamantine sealing chains came into existence, I knew I had found the answer. The Uzumaki had been gifted an unnaturally high affinity towards the yin release. I found that the theory behind this art was incredibly vast, infinite even. Yin release was a form that governed imagination. It is through yin release that form could be created from nothing. It was this that made us specialize in the sealing arts. Sealing itself was a medium used to create miracles with yin release, but really skilled Uzumaki were able to project these abilities without the use of seals. The adamantine sealing chains was the perfect example of this. Chakra was granted the form of chains with an ability to suppress opponents at the level of tailed beasts. Reading up to there, Naruto now understood what made his clan truly scary: potential. His clan was capable of so much more than just the sealing arts, but they were not aware of it. They most likely thought that sealing was their bloodline ability, and their ability to create chains from nothing was just a physical manifestation of it. So much potential was wasted because of a misunderstanding. It was obvious that the person who wrote the scroll did not speak of this to anyone, and it was for the right reasons. It was dangerous knowledge, one that was capable of turning the world against their clan out of fear, not that it mattered much since whatever was left of his clan had scattered across the nations. If what this person said was true, the Uzumaki were capable of creating far more than just chains, and their limit only reached as far as their imagination and skill did, not considering the needed chakra usage, of course. To have the ability to give form to anything from nothing was a near god-like ability, but he knew he was nothing of the sort, at least, not yet anyway. This was the sort of strength he had been seeking, the strength he needed to fight back against all odds and protect himself and his future. With renewed vigor, and continued to read in order to find out the last revelation. He had no doubt he was ready for an even bigger surprise. The discovery of yin release was a huge step in my development, and it was also what led me to discover the final revelation. It was a revelation that brought our own clan to greater heights and our efficiency in battle. The final revelation was the formation of the Kami clan. You are not yet ready to learn of the Kami clan, I'm afraid. Not yet, at least. Naruto couldn't help but release an expression of disappointment, before perking up at the following words. I can assure you though, that if you are able to unseal the other scroll, you will understand. The fact that you were able to unlock the door that kept the scrolls hidden away proves that you are destined to release it. However, you must first study the material of this scroll. You will need great knowledge in micro-sealing, as well as develop your abilities in yin release. I have not bothered with listing any yin release techniques since they are based on one's imagination. You will be given the methods to bring about such a miracle, but you will ultimately be the one to create your own techniques. These things are challenging and will take time. I suggest you seclude yourself for a period of time for training, as I have done. It took me 10 years to master the techniques in the scroll, something I'm sure you will be capable of doing, if not surpassing me. You would be the first to have read these scrolls, and I pray the knowledge will be able to assist you further along into the future. Please bring our clan into a brighter future of success and security. The founder and first clan head of the Uzumaki clan, Ozai Uzumaki. Naruto could feel his heart pulsing, wanting to burst out, but incapable of doing so. There was just too much information at once, he didn't know how to take it. He finally learned what his people were truly capable of, and he was probably the only one who was aware of this. His body shook in excitement and anticipation, and he was extremely eager to learn the materials of this scroll. He then turned his attention to the white scroll with the symbol he now knew represented the Kami clan. Training in seclusion, huh? He thought to himself. If he ever wanted to know what was inside that scroll, he knew it would take quite a bit of time. He was well aware of his current position within Konoha. If he returned, all that would await him was further suffering and more watchful eyes, something he couldn't afford to have. His affinity for yin release and knowledge of powerful sealing techniques and methods is a secret he must keep at all cost from Konoha, especially from Danzo. It was obvious the knowledge would be used selfishly or to put others in danger. He would then become a breeding horse for the village, forsaking the future of any children he created. It was a life he would not deign to do, especially against children of his own. He knew his friends in Konoha may miss him, but Naruto also knew he didn't belong there. He had a feeling in his gut he was never a native to Konoha. He may stop by in secret or develop a spy network there in the future, but he refused to live there. A home was a place you felt safe and loved, and he could not call a place that tortured him out of false spite a home. He closed his eyes and inhaling a deep gust of chilling air. It was dark now, and the cool breeze could be felt and only the crackling sound of a dying fire could be heard before him. He had just made possibly the easiest decision he ever had in his entire life. Opening his eyes, he whispered to no one in particular with a calm, peaceful expression adorning his face and smiled. Sorry guys, but I've always wanted to be free from that place, and now I have that chance. He stopped speaking, before he turned his gaze to the stars in the night sky. I'm afraid Konoha is no longer my home, if it ever was in the first place. I'll be sure to visit in the future, but for now, this is goodbye. A Megakure Tower. The village hidden in the rain was rightfully named so, like all of the other hidden villages. It was an endless downpour of water that only broke this cycle on Sunday. This was a tribute done by a figure that could be seen seated on the tallest tower of the village, a place where Hanzo the salamander had once resided. The face of the tower was disturbing in appearance, literally forming a face on one side with a tongue protruding from its mouth. The eyes this face bore were purple with black-lined ripples within, very much similar to the eyes of the orange-haired figure that sat on the edge of the tongue. His face was littered with the rod-like piercing through his nose, and several studded ones with a long bar going through his ear. He had a fang-like piercing below his lip, and a gaze that seemed to express to emotions whatsoever. Pain. The man, now named Pain, turned his attention to the voice of a woman he had grown to be very familiar with through the years. There, he saw a beautiful woman with a large paper flower holding her blue hair in a bun to the side. Her piercing amber eyes looked upon Pain, waiting to be recognized. Have you found anything, Conan? The now named Conan merely shook her head in response. Seemingly no longer interested, he turned his attention away from her back to the horizon of his village. I see. Conan's expression had faltered slightly into one of sadness before correcting back into her neutral expression. It was saddening to see what had become of Nagato, though she could understand. She felt the same amount of pain he had, if not more. They had lost too much, and they felt happiness was nothing but a dream for them now. I see you two are now together. Might I ask what it was you were searching for, Pain, Conan? Pain now changed his focus upon the new entry. It was a man with a tuft of black hair, garbed in a similar cloak of black and red clouds. His face covered by a spiraling orange mask, with an opening to the right that revealed a dojutsu well known by all, the Sharingan. Pain was quiet for a moment before he decided to answer back. We were searching for potential members to join our cause, Madara. This figure was none other than Madara Uchiha, at least, that was what he wanted people to believe. Not caring too much about the subject, Madara responded in kind. Please, refer to me as Toby from now on. My identity is not something to be revealed quite yet, and to solve your little problem, I have a few prospects that may be worth looking into. That seemed to catch Pain's attention as he now locked eyes with the masked figure. Toby continued, you will hunt down a man by the name of Kakuzu. He is said to be an immortal that had even fought the first Hokage in the past. He has experience beyond his time, and is good at collecting money from high bounties. Funds will be needed for any sort of progress. He then turned his eyes to Conan. You will focus on Sasori of the Red Sand. He is a master puppeteer that has even turned the late third Cage into his puppet. He has a well-established spy network and his resources could be used well. At this knowledge, both figures nodded in response before Pain questioned him. And what of you? Toby released a short, low chuckle before answering. I have two prospects in mind, but they are both quite young for now, both originating from the Hidden Leaf Village. At those words, Pain and Conan seemed to tense their bodies, before quickly returning to a neutral stance. Noticing the slight tensing of their muscles but choosing to ignore it, and spoke on. In fact, I have already led one of my prospects away from their village. He was in need of training materials, and where he went, not even I am capable of reaching. That seemed to stop their thoughts for a moment. A place not even Madara was capable of reaching. They could only imagine what that place must be like. There is no telling what kind of resources he may be able to provide for us, and that is a gamble I am willing to risk. From his background though, I am certain he will become an asset like no other, and I'm positive he will not be returning to his village, I made sure of it. At that moment, his Sharingan seemed to spin very ominously, as if to say he was in control. It was something that seemed to bother Pain. Pain would become the god of the world, if only to grant it an everlasting peace. Madara, in his eyes, was only a tool for his goals. From Toba's eye, space began to distort, engulfing his entire body. They both still have a long ways to go, but I am positive that they will both join the Akatsuki in due time. I have things to check, so I will be leaving first. With those final words, Toby left in a twist of space, leaving nothing but the air and rain in his wake. To him, they were all pawns, puppets to be used for the grand scheme of his plan. He was setting events in place and controlling them by the wire, and the show has only just begun. -5 years later. Kusagakure Forest. Mom, why? Muffled cries and sobs could be heard in the forests of Kusagakure. Sitting against a large tree lays the young culprit, holding onto her knees in an act of loneliness and self-preservation. It was a natural instinct for her, as she continued to delve deeper into depression with her only source of comfort gone from her life. She was a young girl of only 8 years, and had an appearance that many would find rare in this time. She bore crimson eyes and fair skin, with wild red locks of hair that was styled unusually to one side, while the other appeared well kept and straight that hung down to her chin. She wore dark brown glasses, though that did nothing to hide the effect of the captivating red pools that were her eyes. She was clothed in a short-sleeved shirt that was a dark shade of purple with a dark brown collar, and pants and sandals that were a light shade of tan. The way the sun set created a beautiful fusion of purple and orange, cast off an air of melancholy and wonder. The way the light of the setting evening shone itself onto her sorrowful figure was almost picturesque. "Why do I, Sniff, have to be alone, Mom?" The young girl continued wallowing in her despair despite the pleasant evening and quiet environment. What was unsettling about her figure, though, was perhaps how there were a few bite marks on her upper arm. This scene continued for a moment until it was broken by the landing of several figures. They were all plain in appearance with either black or brown hair, with the most unique one being the man in the middle with a mask that hid his nose and mouth. If the young girl noticed their presence, she did nothing to acknowledge them. "Karin Uzumaki, you are asked to return. You are required to carry out the responsibilities your mother left behind. That was the agreement for you to stay here." Being reminded her mother's recent passing made the young redhead's body shiver. She turned her downcast gaze to the figure in front of her, and replaced her look of sadness with anger. "No, you guys let my mother die. And for what? A quick fix." She spoke with unhidden rage. She truly cared nothing for her village or the people within. The only reason she stayed was for her mother, and they were the ones to let her die. "I'm afraid your refusal isn't an option." The masked man spoke without care in his voice. He was a trained shinobi, so he had no reason to be afraid of a young and untrained girl. "You can return willingly, or through force. These are your only options. You will also begin training as a shinobi of our village. We believe this to be a fair trade-off for your services." He spoke once again without emotion. At his words, Karen's body tensed and her face contorted to an extreme amount of hate. Even if she were young, she understood what she was. A tool to be used as a sacrifice for the village shinobi, and having her become one would only increase how fast she could respond to their summons. It was sick, and she was well aware of it. But before she could continue to voice her displeasure, she sensed a powerful presence in the area. It was a strange type of chakra, where opposite energies seemed to coalesce in perfect synergy. It was the mix of a bright and comforting sun with the luminescent and cooling moon. When she felt out for it more, she found herself in a state of euphoria. Before she could continue her thoughts, she felt the source of such a wonderful chakra begin to speak. "You fellows are Kusa shinobi. I didn't take your people to be pedophiles. You guys must be fans of Ika Ika, lowly land." The figure spoke from the shadows of the trees before revealing himself to the group. The said shinobi were greatly annoyed at the comment from this individual, something that didn't go unnoticed, so the figure continued with a hint of amusement in his voice. "Geez, you guys need to know that you can't mix fantasy with reality, and even in the book they were technically legal. What you're doing here is straight up child assault." From the voice, the mysterious figure could be assumed to be a young male. His face was currently being hidden by an Anbu porcelain mask with a blue swirl stretched across, one that Karin found to be familiar. Matching the symbol in color, the figure's hair was also blue and wild in appearance. He also wore a familiar set of Anbu clothing, with black pants and metal forearm protectors. For a top, he had a sleeveless, high-collared gray vest with his arms bandages up to his elbows. It was a bit surprising how little protection he was wearing, but the Kusa shinobi chalked it up to him being overconfident. The figure smirked inwardly at how the said shinobi began to tense and take a combat-ready stance. "Who are you? And what is your reason for being in the village?" The masked shinobi spoke with stern authority that seemed to do nothing to affect the new arrival. Chuckling slightly, the blue-haired figure responded, "Well, I guess you can call me a bounty hunter of sorts. You can call me Narukami for now. As for why I'm here, I was just traveling when I spotted an adorable sad girl." Said girl blushed slightly at his words, but she quickly reined in the heat that appeared on her cheeks, knowing this wasn't exactly a situation to be too relaxed in. Becoming tired of the pointless banter, the Kusa shinobi began drawing their kunai and shuriken, preparing for any sort of confrontation. "I'm afraid you do not have permission to enter our village, so you will need to present yourself to the council and face judgment." Narukami, still amused, replied playfully, "Oh, I think I should be the one reporting you guys for attempted child molestation." Tick marks made their appearance onto the foreheads of said shinobi, and their frustration showed when they threw their weapons at him. When all of their weapons embedded themselves onto the blue-haired shinobi, Karin could only gasp in shock and fear. She knew of death, but has yet to see someone being killed, so her emotions were understandable. The masked man smirked, thinking he succeeded, until he saw the recently skewered figure burst into smoke, revealing only to be a log. He then felt a palm strike land onto his stomach and sent him flying into the trees. The other two were shocked for a moment but were quick to recover by rushing towards the offending shinobi. However, they did not make it far before they were promptly frozen in place. They were confused for a moment before they heard the enemy in front of them answer the questions they seemed to have formed, in a tone that continued to show his amusement. "Did you guys think you were the first to arrive here? I already placed the area you're standing in under a paralysis seal. You have nowhere to run, and nowhere to hide." At this moment, the atmosphere seemed to freeze and all sense of humor was gone from the figure's voice. It brought a feeling of dread to the frozen shinobi as they watched a yellowish-gray glowing katana materialized from nowhere into the aqua head's hands. "Adamantine sealing sword," he called out in his head as it began to finalize in shape and sharpness. He walked past the two Kusa shinobi, flashing a cut of his blade that would put trained samurai to shame towards the necks of the paralyzed ninjas. "And all that is left for you." As he spoke, the sword dissipated into the air and the heads of the trapped shinobi fell to the ground. He turned to glance at his victims and finished in a cold tone with the authority of a god, "Is death." Karin, who had been watching this altercation for the past several seconds, was stock still in shock. "He's fast," she thought to herself. Though she did feel a little sick at his display of strength and beheading of the shinobi, she still couldn't help but feel some admiration for the young man before her. As cold as he seemed just now, his chakra didn't lie to her. She was a gifted sensor, and was able to pick up the unique form of people's chakra to the extent that she could even see someone's character through their chakra. She knew he was a good person at heart, and that only made her feel safe. "My hero," she thought to herself once more with adoration in her eyes and flushed cheeks. The man before her truly seemed like a knight protecting their princess, just like the stories her mother used to tell her. Her inner musings were broken when she picked up dark intentions through the chakra of the last remaining Kusa shinobi. She watched in horror as a large Fuma shuriken began to close in on her hero, without him seeming to notice. "Watch out," she called out, but the figure never moved from his spot. She watched as her savior dropped dead to the ground, with his heart pierced by the flying weapon. "This was more trouble than anticipated, but you underestimated me, thinking a simple palm strike was capable of killing me. You are naive," spoke the voice of the masked man as he walked towards the corpse. Strangely enough, Karin didn't seem sad, only confused. The chakra of the corpse seemed to be pulsing constantly, and distorting slightly, almost as if. Her eyes then widened when she heard a voice from beside her say, as if it were a genjutsu, "Right, Chibi?" She turned her attention to the side and saw a familiar mess of blue hair, and she wasn't the only one to notice his presence. "An illusion? Since when?" the masked figure questioned, slightly intimidated by the prowess of the shinobi before him so far. He moved too quickly for his eyes to keep up. He could form weapons from nothing, and was capable of genjutsu he couldn't even notice. He was stacking up to be a top player, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up with this mysterious shinobi. Narukami looked at him as if the man before him was stupid. Why would a shinobi tell you his secrets? Especially when it is an enemy he is still fighting. Tired of being insulted, the Kusa shinobi charged forward towards Narukami hoping to combat him in taijutsu, and was not disappointed. Dodging a wild punch from the masked man, Narukami fired a kick into his side, expecting him to be sent flying once more. He was surprised to see that the man had not only stood in his place, but his skin seemed to darken. Noticing Narukami's slight surprise, he laughed out loud before retaliated with a kick of his own, only for it to be dodged as well. Haha, you probably think you're something special. Well, I possess a Kekkei Genkei that makes anything physical useless. Steel release. Iron hide. He finished loudly, before all of his skin darkened and he continued his charge. Narukami continued to dodge gracefully even when weapons, kicks and punches were thrown at him. This only seemed to boost the masked ninja's ego, thinking he had him on the ropes. Ha ha ha, can't you do anything but run away, boy? He continued to egg him on despite the fact he had been missing the whole time. Karin watched on with a nervous sweat, praying that the masked man wasn't too much for the blue-haired shinobi. After Narukami dodged another wild punch that shattered the ground where he once stood, he moved away a great distance. The Kusa ninja was increasingly growing irritated, wanting to end this man's life sooner rather than later. His chakra was beginning to run low at a pace faster than usual, which he found strange, but nothing too terrible. Before he could continue his barrage of strikes, he heard a cold voice ring out from the man before him that froze him in his tracks. That's it. You are a Junin, aren't you? He could only sigh in disappointment as he shook his head. I swear, if I want a challenge, I'm going to have to start attacking S ranks or something. Guys like you are nothing but trash that relies on one ability for everything. He continued, before he sent a harsh glare to the Kusa nin that he could feel even through Narukami's mask. It sent shivers down his spine, but he quickly corrected himself to shake it off. Your uncanny ability to underestimate your opponents is astounding. I will make sure you regret it. He responded with clear disdain dripping from his voice. Narukami still only continued to shake his head in disappointment, and slowly rose one hand into a hand seal. I don't think I am the one underestimating his opponent. Release. He said before chanting out a single word. Upon hearing this, the masked Kusa nin felt his body freeze again and immediately his chakra was drained. Once this happened, a small set of sealing characters appeared onto his chest and began to glow. From the seal, tendrils of chakra appeared and wrapped itself around his body, with his steel release immediately dissipating. He felt ragged, as if he performed a marathon for 3 days straight without rest. He felt his chakra was completely gone and his body was becoming strained in pain as the tendrils began to tighten around him. With a tired voice, he asked, "What have you done?" Dropping his hand to a resting position, he decided to humor the man. Parasitic chakra seal, he said nonchalantly. I planted it onto your body from the first palm strike. I was looking to experiment with it on somebody, and you just so happened to be my subject. He spoke with exaggerated excitement, though you could see he was happy with the results of his work. Fury and exhaustion was all that could be seen in the Kusa nin's eyes as he glared hatefully at the man before him. Karin was shocked at the chakra she was sensing, and was curious at what was happening exactly. Sensing the redhead's curiosity, Narukami turned to her and spoke loud enough for her to hear. I'm sure you can sense it, but I essentially implanted a parasite seal on his body. It takes time, but it begins to adapt to the person's chakra nature, assimilating with it. Narukami then turned his attention back to the Kusa nin before continuing. I was making you use more chakra and strength so the seal could fuse faster to your chakra network. And once that is done, he then snapped his fingers. In response, a tendril reached for Ninja's neck and began to choke very tightly, but not enough to snap his neck. Your own chakra becomes your worst enemy. He said with a mischievous smirk, unseen to both Karin and the subject to his experiment. Narukami shrugged his shoulders and stated, even if it is slow acting, I thought it would be fun to see someone fight against their own chakra. And it certainly didn't disappoint. The KUSA nin tried to speak, but found that he was incapable due to lack of oxygen. And once more, the Aqua Head's cold voice appeared. Now that I see that it is a success, you no longer serve a purpose. So please, he paused to raise an open hand, before clenching it into a tight fist. Die. And once he finished, the tendrils shattered all of the victim's bones and neck, before dissipating along with the man's life. Narukami let out a short, but audible sigh. He truly was disappointed. He had plenty of other things he wanted to experiment with and try out, but the ninja he's encountered so far just were not up to his standards. He may just have to actively seek out S-rank shinobi, but they were all skilled in staying hidden. Turning his attention back to the girl, he was only hoping that she wasn't too traumatized by his cruelty. He became surprised when he came closer to the girl and saw that in her eyes wasn't fear, but worship. Said girl just looked at the man before her and shouted loudly, "Thank you." And faster than he could react, she embraced him in a hug. He was about to pry her off before he felt her sob a little into his torso. "Thank you, thank you," sniff. Narukami could only wrap his arms around the girl in an effort to comfort her. He couldn't help that he was a sucker for a girl in tears. I doubt there is a man with a heart that would turn away a girl in tears. He thought to himself as he helplessly continued to calm the girl down with small ministrations to her back. It was about 10 minutes before she pulled away from him and wiped away her tears. "Thank you, you were really amazing," she said in unhidden excitement, before her face contorted into one of confusion. "But why did you help me? We've never met before, and now you might be hunted down by Kusagakure shinobi," she said with slight worry in her tone. Narukami then adopted a relaxed stance before ruffling the girl's hair. "Well, I have a few reasons. 1. I really did just happen to be around the area before I spotted you. And 2. He then brought his hand to his mask, before pulling it off slowly. Karin then watched as his mask came off, his hair transformed from the dark shade of blue it was before, to a vibrant red. She blushed slightly when she saw the handsome face of the man before her. He appeared 13 in age, and his skin was flawless other than what seemed to be whiskers adorned on his cheeks. She thought it was rather cute on him, and was tempted to pet them. He was above average in height, somewhere close to 5 feet 4 inches. A closer inspection of his figure showed how fit his body truly was. She was broken from her musings when he continued to speak. He smirked, noticing he now had her full attention, and proceeded to shock her with his next words. "Besides, we are from the same clan." Karin did the only thing she could do from such a revelation, she fainted. Our now revealed Naruto Uzumaki could only scratch his helplessly before whispering to himself, "Was that too much?" -3 weeks later. Konohagakure Gates. Heading towards the gates of Konoha, 2 figures can be seen. One was a red-haired girl currently being carried on the back of the other blue-haired figure. She could be seen with her arms wrapped around his neck, questioning him about their current destination. "Didn't you say you didn't like this place, Naru?" the young Karin asked innocently. Her only response was a nod of his head. "Then why are we here?" she continued to question. Naruto could only sigh inwardly. This little girl has been attached to him since he saved her from the Kusa shinobi. When she awoke from her small nap, courtesy of fainting, her natural inquisitive nature of a child kept pressing him for answers. True to her clan name, she was immensely stubborn on finding out more about her clan and Naruto himself. It was cute, for the first 5 hours. Then it became downright exhausting, and he couldn't afford to stay there too long before more shinobi showed up. Before he could leave though, she practically begged to go with him. He was reluctant about caring for a child at first, until she unleashed something he had yet to experience before then. Those eyes, they were truly weapons every man should fear. Naruto thought in slight terror and tremble in his step. He had never experienced such a look before, and almost instinctually dubbed them, the eyes. I doubt anyone with a heart could resist those things. Naruto was then broken from his thoughts when he felt a pinch on his cheek that came from a small hand slipping under his mask. He turned his attention back to the young redhead and noticed she had a slight pout on her face. "Stop ignoring me, Naru," she exclaimed to him, more for attention than an actual answer to her question. Naruto supposed that should be a given for someone her age. He was well aware of what happened to her mother through their journey together, and now that she had no one, he thought that she had a stronger desire to have someone with her. He then decided to be the acting big brother until she was able to find people precious to her. Unknown to him though, Karin didn't truly desire a familial relationship with him. She could only see him as her prince who rescued her. In her mind, her stake had already been claimed the moment she saw him. Naruto and his beautiful chakra was hers now, and she would make sure that was clear to others. She had yet to understand what love was, but desire was something very basic to every child. And she knew what she wanted. Back to the topic at hand, Naruto sighed before responding back. "Well, I have to turn in that bounty we got last week, and there is something I have been meaning to look for here that I won't be able to find easily anywhere else." Karin only nodded her head in response. She didn't know the details, but it was clear through the fluctuations in his chakra that he was perturbed about going back to Konoha for any reason. She didn't think it was her place to ask him about it yet, and just took to being by his side. As they approached the gates, two guards could be seen. One appeared to have long, spiky black hair with a bandage across his face. The other had brown hair and dark eyes, and had his hair combed over his right eye. The two noticed the approaching figures, and seemed to tense a bit at the suspicious mask of Naruto. This was relieved slightly when they noticed he was carrying a young girl on his back who didn't seem to be afraid or worried. To them, this may allude to the idea that he may not be as bad as one might assume from his hidden identity. In a typical fashion, the brown-haired Izumo shouted, "Halt! Sat your business in Konoha." Naruto, hearing the man, reached for a scroll in his pocket, as well as his certification as a bounty hunter, and turned it over to the two men. "I'm here to turn in a bounty and hoping to receive some identification papers for little Karin here," he stated while pointed to the red head on his back. She pouted at being called little, but didn't say anything in response. She just turned her head away, ignoring the snickering of the two men before her. "Hee. It seems she isn't too fond about being called out on her height, much like another redhead we have in our village." Kotetsu spoke with a shiver down his spine. He remembered when he called Mito a shorty one time, and lived to regret it the next morning when he felt itching powder on his crotch. This wouldn't have been too bad if his hands weren't dipped in a chemical solution that made his genitalia burn every time he scratched it, and this happened for 3 days straight. Naruto was confused by the slight shiver of the man, but ignored it. When he received the papers, Kotetsu and Izumo then directed him to the Hokage's quarters to receive the bounty and register Karin for her papers. He briskly walked by them, and continued towards the tower, not exactly happy about returning to this village. "Sigh, this is gonna be a long day," he thought to himself before flashing away in a shuntion of leaves. Hokage's tower. Naruto could now be seen standing before a desk that seated, arguably, one of the strongest shinobi within the village. Karin was holding Naruto's hand, and sent a glance of worry towards him. She felt him tense and his chakra fluctuate slightly upon seeing the blonde Hokage, so she figured that whatever happened in this village may have involved him. The said blonde shinobi was currently overlooking the scroll that held the head of an A-rank bounty they had placed long ago and nodded his head. "Thank you for your services and we will gladly repay you. Unfortunately, I must ask that you stay in the village for a bit." Naruto raised a hidden eyebrow towards the Hokage, but otherwise stayed silent so Minato could finish explaining his reasons. Taking his silence for further inquiry, Minato proceeded. While he wasn't a huge threat, he did have a sizable bounty. It will take some time to fully verify his identity and prepare the amount. I hope you can stay for a few days while we go through this process. We will fully compensate you for your stay here and prepare proper lodgings for you and the young girl. He then cast a curious glance to Karin. So she is an Uzumaki. Kushina will probably be happy to hear there are more of her clan still living. Sensing his curious gaze, Karin moved behind Naruto away from Minato's view. Realizing he was causing her discomfort, he turned his attention back to Naruto, awaiting his response. Naruto could only nod his head. He planned to stay here regardless since he had another reason for being here, and it was sure to require longer than a day to achieve. That is fine with me, Lord Hokage. I had already planned to stay here for a period of time to purchase more clothing for Karin as well as more traveling supplies. I already have my lodgings planned, but I appreciate the gesture. He then bowed his head slightly in respect, though Karin was able to feel his muscles tense once again and his chakra fluctuate even more than before, as if it were revealing his frustration. The Hokage nodded his head at his acceptance and then handed over a set of papers. Here is the identification papers for young Karin, and it should be processed by tomorrow. Please enjoy your stay in Konoha. Naruto didn't bother to respond before grabbing Karin's hand and making his way out the door. Enjoy my stay here, Naruto ridiculed inwardly. This place is the bane of my existence. I'll show you exactly how I enjoy my stay here. With those dark thoughts left behind, Naruto left the door and decided to make his way to the hotel he had booked. Streets of Konoha. Naru, I don't like all the staring. Can we move faster? Karin and Naruto were walking down the streets of Konoha, bypassing a lot of people and shops. It wasn't hard for them to garner attention considering their appearances. Karin herself was very adorable in appearance with vibrant red hair, and Naruto was very mysterious with his mask and uncommon blue hair. Their looks alone would gain interest, but together they made a very unique pairing. Karin was feeling a bit uncomfortable due to the natural heightened ability of awareness she has as a sensor. She also felt that they were followed by a couple of shinobi hidden in the shadows. She tugged on his sleeve, hoping to get her message across, and received a nod in reply. We're unknowns here, Karin. It's natural we would be watched during our stay. The civilians are naturally curious and skeptical as well, he said, only barely hiding his dislike for the civilian populace. Noticing his constant shifts in demeanor since their arrival in the village, Karin decided to voice her concerns. Naru, are you okay? Hearing her words, Naruto turned his attention to her and sighed before ruffling her hair. I'm fine, Karin. I just don't have a great history with Konoha. I'm still trying to work out some things with this place, but I'll be fine, okay? Karin could sense the slightly sad tone in his voice, and decided to not question further. She only nodded her head in response. She also decided to take advantage of his ministrations with her hair by pushing her head into the palm of his hands. Naruto laughed a little, finding her obsession with his head rubbing cute and a little funny. She would act like a cat seeking attention at times, and could be bratty during others. Seriously, she has to be part cat, he thought. He turned his attention briefly to the anbu that were hidden. He noticed one had a cat mask that was commonly passed down, but he also saw another mask that he had yet to see from his time here. A weasel, I didn't even know they had a mask like that. He mused to himself, deep in thought about who it could be. He felt a strange familiarity with that figure, so it did linger his mind for a bit. The quiet moment of he had with Karin was broken when a yell was heard from a familiar-looking ramen shop. Old man Tuki, I'd like 12 bowls of ramen please, shouted a young feminine voice. Recognizing the voice, Naruto smiled slightly beneath his mask, recognizing who the source was. Karin seemed to notice how Naruto became happier when he heard the girl's voice, making her voice frown slightly. She would admit to being a bit possessive of Naruto, but she figured it was only natural considering her circumstances. She noticed Naruto grab her hand and started to pull her along to the source of the yell. Come on, Karin, I'll take you to one of the few places I like in Konoha. She only nodded her head before she found herself seated at a ramen stand with her guardian. They sat at the far right, waiting for their order to be taken. And as if on cue, a young brown-haired waitress came up to the two and proceeded to ask them what they would have. Karin wasn't sure what exactly to get, but Naruto seemed to place an order for anyways. I'll have 12 bowls of miso ramen, and she will have the same. The young waitress appeared shocked for a moment before nodding her head slowly. She hadn't known anyone to eat that much unless they were an Uzumaki. Her thoughts briefly went to a male Uzumaki she had met when she was younger, before shaking her head. It was a sad time for her, hearing one of their best customers and crush go missing, but she managed to stave her sadness through work and time, though she still felt pain now and then. She flashed a bright smile after her brief lapse in history to her customers before nodding her head. We'll be right with you in a second. With that said, she turned away and continued to work on the preparations with her father. From the corner of her eye, Karin noticed another redhead seated at the opposite end of the stand who seemed just as surprised as Ayame had been. That lasted only for a moment before said redhead moved closer to them and began to converse. Wow, I didn't know there was someone else in the village who could eat as much ramen as me or my mom. The little girl flashed a bright smile towards the two, showing how energetic and happy she really was. My name is Mito Uzumaki Namikaze. But you can just call me Mito. Naruto nodded his head in response, smiling underneath his mask. Nice to meet you, Mito. I'm Narukami, and my little companion is Karin Uzumaki. Karin's only response was to send a stiff smile and bowed her head slightly in a greeting. It's a pleasure. She was still a bit annoyed that Naruto seemed to be happier meeting the younger girl, but there was another reason she was stiff. When she searched out her chakra, she felt two completely opposing natures. One was bright like the sun, which could be seen in the girl's personality. However, she was also able to sense a malevolent and dark chakra around her stomach. It was huge in size and chaotic in nature. It made Karin reel back a bit and seek comfort from Naruto by grasping his arm. Naruto noticed this action, and knew exactly why she was acting this way, but remained silent for the time being. This all happened without Mito's notice, since she was more shocked knowing that there was another Uzumaki in the village. Awesome. That means that we're kind of like cousins. She exclaimed excitedly. Karin's eyes seemed to widen a bit at the revelation, knowing she had more family within the village. Before the conversation could continue further, an old man in the back of the stand appeared with a large quantity of bowls prepared for their meal. Before Mito could dig into her food, she was suddenly poked in the side of her head by the blue-haired shinobi. It annoyed her a bit, and as she was about to voice it loudly, she saw him lift up the offending finger in front of her. How about we make this a contest? Whoever eats their ramen the fastest wins. If I win, you pay for my meal. If you win, then I will pay for your meal and more. Sound good? Without hesitation, she responded, all right. But don't come crying to me when your wallet is empty, Tabasa. Naruto could only chuckle at her verbal tick. It was cute for someone her age. With Tsuki serving as the judge, he nodded his head and said, ready. Set. Ramen. Mito proceeded to practically inhale her first bowl. It only took 10 seconds her to finish all of its contents. She smirked, knowing she would be victorious. She hasn't even lost to that pudgy kid Choji in a ramen eating contest. As she was about to start her second bowl, she heard 4 words that shocked her into place. Thanks for the food. It was done in a calm tone, but Mito could hear the slight teasing and superiority in his voice. Watching this all go down, Karin was more shocked at how he was able to eat the ramen with his mask on. She would have to ask him how he was able to do that later. Mito was stunned to the point she couldn't form coherent words. But, ramen, you're fast. That's not fair. Her shock was quickly replaced with comic outrage as she stood from her spot and pointed her finger in his direction. Naruto just stood and chuckled at her response. Ruffling her hair, he said, "What's the matter, little pepper? I won fair and square." Mito's displeasure was shown on her face almost immediately. It was a known fact that her mother was the red-hot-blooded habanero of the leaf, so she felt his nickname was a play on her mother's nickname. The fact that she was called little only served to irk her more. "Hey, I'm not that little, and don't call me a pepper," she exclaimed in an over-exaggerated fashion by waving her arms around. She still did nothing to remove his hand from her head because it felt strangely warm. For once, Naruto laughed out loud, which caught even Karin by surprise. She had heard him chuckle every once in a while, but she had yet to hear him truly laugh like he just did. Because of this, she turned a glare to Mito and began to reflect on any information she had gathered from this meeting. Naru knows this girl and seems to have a soft spot for her. I'll need to keep an eye on her in the future. Naru is my Naru, she thought childishly to herself. She was still peeved Mito's hair was being ruffled, but did nothing to voice her displeasure. It was rare to see Naruto as happy as he is, and she didn't want to spoil it. When Naruto removed his hand from her head, he reached into his pocket to pull out a large sum of cash before placing it onto the table. Tuki and Ayame went wide-eyed when they saw this action, but remained silent. "Relax, little pepper. Like I would make a chibi pay for my food," he managed to voice out in between chuckles. "To make up for it, I'll pay for your food and more. How does that sound?" At that, Mito instantly grew a smile onto her face before pulling Naruto into an abrupt hug, catching both him and Karin off guard, with the latter fuming a bit at the action. "Thank you, Naru," she yelled once more, before excitedly turning to Tuki. "You heard him, old man. I want 12 more bowls, Tabasa." Tuki could only chuckle before returning back to his preparations, thanking the blue-haired young man for the good business. Naruto then pried Mito off of him, before voicing his leave. "Well, I and Karin should get going now, little pepper. We'll be here for a bit, so we'll probably see each other around at some point." Mito acknowledged them leaving with a smile and wave. "Okay, I will definitely beat you next time though, you better believe it, Tabasa." At those last few words, Naruto shivered for a bit. Strange, that almost felt like something I should say. He then took Karin by her hand before leaving the stand and heading back to the hotel. Before he left the shop, he managed to catch sight of a familiar old man, one who used to be a shinobi. His figure seemed to freeze him for a moment, and drew another look of concern from Karin. It was someone who had offended him plenty of times in the past, someone who had tried to rape him on multiple occasions and burrowed kunai into his leg. He was perhaps the most disgusting of people he had encountered during his stay in Konoha, not counting Orochimaru. A cold light flashed in his eyes that made even Karin put a little distance between her and Naruto. "So you're still around, old trash," he thought darkly. "Perhaps I should relieve a little stress tonight." With that, he and Karin returned back to their inn. One would be resting for the night, while the other would be having their own adventure. Streets of Konoha, evening. An old drunk man could be seen wandering the streets at night. It was darker out than usual with the clouds covering the moon slightly, so he found himself stumbling over several trash cans and bumping into buildings. As he moved through the streets, he felt himself suddenly pulled into an alley and thrown against the wall. If he were not an ex-trained shinobi, he felt as if his spine would have shattered on impact. Gah! He spat out excess saliva and the remains of whatever alcohol he held upon receiving the impact. He continued to writhe on the ground in pain, while a dark figure stood above him. It took him a moment to notice, but when he did, he became frightened and crawled himself to a wall. He was panting raggedly, trying to bear the pain and voicing out his grievances. Who are you? And what the hell are ya thinkin'?" Still not fully aware of his circumstances, he yelled out as if he were the one in power and not groveling on the ground. He heard the figure chuckle softly before they decided to speak. "What's wrong, geezer? Don't recognize me? I thought you said you were going to show me a good time." Was I right about you not being able to get it up? The ex-shinobi felt himself begin to boil in rage, but also thoroughly confused. Whoever this person was, he held some sort of enmity with him, and it was definitely a deep one. He was confused because he couldn't recall offending anyone. Deciding to not take his chances, he began to speak in a more respectful tone. Sir, I'm sure whatever enmity you have against me is misplaced. I don't ever recall someone with blue hair such as yours, so I'm positive you have the wrong person. Naruto just chuckled once more before placing his hand on his mask. Oh, I can assure you I'm not mistaken. So tell me, as he spoke, he slowly removed his mask, transforming his hair from blue to red, revealing a familiar set of whisker marks the man had long since thought disappeared from the village. He was stunned into silence when he recognized the boy before him. It can't be. Naruto produced a playful smirk on his face, amused by the old man's reaction before continuing. Do I still look feminine to you? The old man was now feeling fear for himself. He was well aware of what he had done to the boy. In fact, he enjoyed every bit of the torture he had caused him. But now, it seemed like all of his action had come back to bite him in the. The village thought that you died. He all but yelled out in disbelief. He was there when Naruto was dumped into the large body of water, and truly felt there was no coming back from something like that. Old man, you really are naive, aren't you? Naruto bit out coldly, sending a shiver down the old man's spine. Seeing me here, I'm sure you can guess what is going to happen next, correct? He spoke nonchalantly, as if the man's impending doom was nothing important. Please, please don't kill me, I'll do anything. He yelled out in desperation. He was old, and he knew he was incapable of doing anything to him. That one impact on his spine almost killed him by itself. He was about to continue his pleading before he was stopped by abrupt laughter. Ha ha ha, kill you, why would I do that? And before the old man could feel a sense of relief, he was quickly brought down once again. You deserve much worse than death. You are scum that was capable of harming a child, to the point of attempted rape. You are disgusting, I doubt anyone would miss you even if you did disappear. Naruto continued to bring the old man down in this verbal torment, until the old man couldn't take it anymore. He already knew he was fucked, so he might as well get his last words in. Ha, you aren't a child, you're a spawn of a demon, and a constant reminder of our tragedy. You are the one who wouldn't be missed. I may be trash, but even trash is above monsters, you demon. He spat out as cruel as he could muster. If Naruto was angry at the man's response, it wasn't shown. He walked towards the old man with a piece of paper with strange characters in hand. And before the man could yell, he felt his body freeze as a paralysis seal was placed on his forehead. I'm afraid I can't have you yell or move while I am at work. He then practically punched his fist into the old man's mouth, shattering some teeth in the process. Muffled cries of pain from the old man could be heard as blood seeped from his gum down his chin, dripping onto the floor. Naruto then roughly yanked the man's tongue out, but not enough for it to be ripped from its confines. He raised a finger that began to glow a black light. Yin release. Mimicry method. Rather than a technique, it was a sealing method he had learned from the scroll through Yin release. It allowed him to recreate any seals he made from memory, giving it an instant casting ability. How long it took to be recreated depended on the complexity. The seal he was trying to recreate would only take a few seconds before creation. When Naruto's finger made contact with the man's tongue, a familiar root seal embedded itself onto it, and though it wasn't visible in appearance, he made slight adjustments to its design. Naruto then released his tongue, and pulled his body away from the old man. The old man was still paralyzed when he heard Naruto begin to speak. I just gave you a seal I used to have with some improvements of my own design. I didn't have a name for it, but I guess I'll call it the Seal of Damnation. He began while smiling darkly. With it, you will no longer be able to speak again. Every time you eat will feel like swallowing needles and taste like shit. Every time you drink will feel like drowning in fire. At the sound of what Naruto had done, he could only whimper in his paralyzed and pained state. If he thought that was all, he was about to be disappointed. If you even try to commit any form of suicide, point out the seal on your tongue or attempt to give any information about me, your body will become paralyzed in movement but will feel like you are being stabbed constantly, until you no longer feel suicidal or are no longer considered a threat to myself. And even if the seal was found, he then closed in on the old man once more, bringing his face to his before continuing. It would backtrack to the root organization, leaving me scot-free and damning a powerhouse of Konoha in the process. Tears began to drip down the old man's face, realizing he would now be tortured just from having daily necessities for living. Just by staying alive, he would be tortured endlessly. Naruto then grasped the man's neck and proceeded to choke him into unconsciousness, but not before saying one final piece. Sweet dreams, old man, because whenever you sleep, it will only be of you being raped by a carbon copy of yourself. With those last words, the old man fell into a slumber of nightmares while Naruto just watched his last look of terror. Standing from his position, Naruto remained stoic and cold, reflecting on his most recent action. He looked at his hands and thought to himself, the darker aspects of yin release is starting to show itself, and it's affecting even my actions. I'm really going to have to get to Kumo sooner rather than later. Naruto felt no regret for the old man, he had done plenty to deserve that seal. He was a frequent abuser towards Naruto, the most common one in fact. At times, he would do it every day. If Naruto did not have any form of training, he was sure he would have been raped already, and became nothing more than a rag doll for his personal use. He truly was a disgusting man with no hope for change. But even if he didn't feel regret, he knew he was becoming more influenced by the darker aspects of the yin release. He did not want it to reach the extent where it affected people he cared for, so he resolved to get it fixed. And the only way to challenge the darker side of his ability was to confront it directly, and he only knew of one place that could help.